2 months later. The dull ache in her lower back had been steadily getting worse as V sat in the small chair which was propped up in their tent. The monitor on the table next to her cast a dim, green glow, which provided just enough illumination for her to make out Judy's form sleeping on the cot. Laying on her side, one arm still remained stretched out across the empty space next to her where V had been sleeping up until a few hours earlier when she had suddenly awoken to find her heart pounding in her chest. She had nearly panicked and screamed as she felt her blood pumping faster and faster, unable to stop itself until it had abruptly returned to its normal rhythm. V had wanted so badly to believe that it was just a panic attack. Perhaps it was a reaction to an unremembered nightmare, or it could have been that her body was simply responding to the mental strain she was under due to the growing realization that her time was running out. But the intensity of the episode and the strange constriction she had felt in her lungs had told her otherwise. And it hadn't been the first time she had experienced it in recent days.
It's starting.
After she had calmed herself, V had slid out of bed, being careful not to wake Judy, who had merely rolled over and limply laid her hand on the mattress where V had been a moment earlier before her breathing deepened once more. Quietly shuffling through her bag, she had taken out the bottle of pills Matt had given to her when they had visited the clinic, his words echoing in her head.
When things start to get worse, and you'll know it when they do, I want you to start taking these. Only one a day, no more than that, alright? They'll help with thinning your blood to take the load off of your heart while also giving a small boost to your red blood cell count, but I can't stress enough. No more than one a day. These aren't meant to be taken for a prolonged period as they will eventually toxify your system, and it is absolutely critical that you stop taking these when your condition gets really bad. Otherwise, they'll only act to poison you and kill you faster. And you'll know when that time comes as well.
For the last 2 months, V had done her best to avoid the small bottle of pills she had intentionally shoved to the bottom of the bag. The doctor had been right thus far about how things would progress. Upon their return to the newly established camp which they had set up near the Arizona border, her symptoms had been steadily improving. The headaches had become less frequent and were no longer striking her like a hot iron each day, and the last time she had bled from her nose had been nearly 2 weeks earlier. Though V knew these were deceiving signs of her deteriorating condition, she had welcomed the deception. Her time with Judy, while not the new life she had promised to her when they had set out from Night City months ago, had been filled with a happiness and even a tranquility V had never known before. Their lives had settled into a familiar routine as they learned how to live amongst the Aldecaldos and adapt to their new lifestyle. Judy had found her niche in helping with the daily maintenance that was needed on the fleet of cars, trucks, and campers that encircled them, while V had found it easy to help some of the others with scouting and hunting. Every day, they kept themselves busy with their work while still having plenty of opportunities to spend time together. In the evenings, they would sit near the campfire and spend hours talking with each other as the stars slowly faded into view above them before returning to the tent which had become their de facto home and make love to one another. And each night they fell asleep in each other's arms. It was a routine, one which V and Judy had learned to love and to look forward to and had found comfort in. But V was also aware of the growing sense of anxiety which was creeping its way into both of their thoughts with each passing day. Whether it was a brief flicker in Judy's eyes when she looked at her, or the way she would sometimes squeeze her tighter when they embraced, V could perceive Judy was growing increasingly afraid, just as she was. Neither of them would speak of it, silently choosing not to ruin all the little moments of beauty and happiness they had enjoyed each day, but a looming inevitability was starting to close in on them. Clinging to a desperate hope had been their one respite. Pan Am had kept up the search for the professor they had been referred to, and had continued to seek out any knowledge or insight on possible alternatives. Nanites, AIs, even human cloning. Nothing was off limits as Pan Am tried to keep V's spirits up, though her daily updates on possible angles they could pursue had actually been having the opposite effect on V lately, serving only to push her slowly towards the realization that there was nothing which could be done. But still, V maintained the illusion of optimism for Pan Am, and especially for Judy. Opening the bottle, she dumped one of the pills into her palm. Their plain white color and innocuous size almost gave the impression they were a substitute for something as benign as aspirin, though their true purpose was not lost on V's mind. Tossing the pill into her mouth, V swallowed it down before putting the bottle back in her bag. Returning her gaze to Judy, the now familiar lump in her throat returned once more as the same questions she had been asking herself for weeks once again recycled through her mind.
Why is this happening to me? To us? What the fuck am I going to do?
Things had been different when the biochip had been the cause of her earlier brush with death. While the path forward then had not been clear to her, there had at least been enough threads for her to pursue an answer, and there had been an urgency which had pushed her forward. But there was no path forward she could see, and her drive to survive, which had overridden the torrent of emotions which had pulled at her earlier, was slowly being replaced with a growing sense of inevitability. V was acutely aware that she now had just over 3 months before her body would start shutting down as her own immune system kept up its relentless assault, which would eventually lead to her organs failing. And all the while, her mind desperately grasped for answers which couldn't be found. Judy. She had been a rock for V during this time, refusing to allow her to succumb to the growing fear which was gnawing away at her. But as V stared at the woman who slept peacefully across from her, she was aware that it was because of Judy that this was becoming increasingly difficult for her to face. The hardest part of dying, it had turned out, was seeing what it did to the woman who loved her. Glancing down at her hollow, V noted the sun would be up soon and silently put on her boots, hoping an early morning walk would help calm her nerves. Standing as she slid on her jacket, she heard a faint rustle next to her. V? Judy's groggy voice was mirrored in her expression, which V could faintly make out against the glow of the nearby monitor. Her eyes squinted and a look of confusion spread across her face. "Hey," V whispered as she knelt next to Judy. "Sorry I woke you. Gonna be morning soon. Just gonna go for a walk. Go back to sleep." V planted a gentle kiss on Judy's head, taking a moment to admire the long strands of green which she had continued to grow out since they had left Night City. The purple tips now reached past her shoulders, and she had recently dyed the roots of her hair pink, telling V it was because it was her favorite color. After that, V had felt obligated to return the gesture and had dyed her own roots blue to reflect Judy's favorite color. The jokes from Pan Am hadn't stopped since, as she often would refer to V as the cotton candy girl due to the contrasting pink and blue hues, but she didn't mind the teasing. As V started to stand, Judy grabbed her wrist. "Stay." V sighed as a small smile spread across her face. "All right, you convinced me." V threw her jacket back on the table and slid under the blanket next to Judy, pulling her in tightly as Judy snuggled against her and wrapped an arm around her waist. For a while they lay in silence, and V started to feel her fatigue creeping back into her as her mind settled. Just as her eyes were beginning to close, Judy pulled her head back. "You took one?" V's eyes snapped open.
Fuck.
V shifted so she was laying on her side facing Judy. "Yeah, just figured I got plenty of them, and best to start before I begin to feel anything." She tried to express as much confidence as she could, though she felt a stab of guilt as she lied, which was quickly followed by panic as she saw Judy's eyes narrow. "Bullshit. Don't fucking lie to me, V." V pressed on, committing herself fully to the deception in the vain hope she could convince Judy. "I'm not lying, all right? I've got more than enough and just wanted to keep myself running as best I can." Silence passed between them as Judy studied V's face. She was grateful it was still dark enough to hide the tone of her own skin, which had turned a bright shade of red. "What are you doing, V? You've had those fucking things stashed as far out of sight as possible for months, and now you just decide to pop one? Not buying it, V, and I don't know why you're lying to me." As Judy methodically picked apart her deception, V began to feel an irritation burning its way through her, which quickly made its way to the surface. "Fine. Woke up with my heart pounding and decided it was just time to start, okay? Just back off it, all right?" Another period of silence passed, and though V felt ashamed of the way she had snapped at Judy, the irritation within her was continuing to build into something greater as the tips of her fingers began to tingle. Judy popped up in bed. "What the fuck, V? I'm just concerned about you is all. I don't need to bite my head off for it. I'm sorry, all right?" V said through gritted teeth, knowing the apology lacked any genuineness. "Fine, be sorry all you want, but don't lie to me and get pissed off just because I give a damn." Throwing the blanket off of her, V scrambled out of bed and snatched her jacket off the table, hastily putting it on. "Fuck this." V quickly walked towards the entrance of the tent, stopping only when Judy called out to her. "V, what the hell is going on with you?" "What the hell is going on with me? Seriously? That's the best fucking question you can ask? Fuck off." V threw her arm in the air and left the tent, the dense fabric muffling whatever words Judy had spoken after she left. The cool morning air felt refreshing against her skin as she walked through the camp. An eerie silence hung in the air. Far off in the distance, a slight hint of blue was creeping above the horizon as the first hint of dawn slowly appeared. V continued to walk past the perimeter of the camp, nodding to the sentry who was sitting on top of a nearby camper. She didn't have a destination in mind, so long as it was away. For a long time, she walked across the desert as if trying to reach the sun itself, which was now beginning to cast gentle shades of yellow and pink across the sky. Her anger had seemed to subside as a strange numbness settled over her.
"There's nothing out here for you, V."
Finally coming to a stop, V scanned her surroundings. Barren desert with the occasional rock and cactus were all that she could see in every direction.
"I can't run away from this."
Sitting down on the ground, she folded her knees and rested her elbows upon them as she continued to watch the sunrise. A hint of movement out of the corner of her eye drew her attention to the ground. A small beetle was slowly crawling its way across the sand, climbing over the occasional pebble. V watched, entranced, as the insect went about its way, completely unaware of her presence, unaware of its own mortality, and unable to be afraid of its own inevitable death. Suddenly, a flood of anger unleashed within her. She bowed her head and clenched her fists, feeling her nails scraping into the skin of her palms. Taking deep breaths, she tried to battle against the rage which was boiling within her, but it was too much. V snapped her head up and screamed at the top of her lungs for as long as she could, pounding her fists into the sand. When the scream had finally escaped her, she screamed once more, a guttural sound this time, which made her throat turn raw. Tears spilled down her cheeks as her anger slowly began to subside into self-pity. She shouted to the empty expanse in front of her. "This isn't fair. I've had enough. Just stop. Please." Sobbing, she managed once more in a small whimper. "Please." V lowered her head once more and sobbed. When the sun had grown brighter in the morning sky, V stood and began to make her way back to the camp. She hadn't realized when she had left just how far she had walked. Judging from the time it took for her to return, she must have wandered at least a few miles. As she approached, she could see the usual buzz of activity as the Aldecaldos had begun their morning routine, eating breakfast and preparing themselves for the work ahead. The camp itself had grown much larger than at any point V had seen in her time she had spent with them. Several weeks back, a different group of Aldecaldo members from another local chapter had come to the camp with the intent of wanting to join. Their own leader had grown sick, and Pan Am had welcomed them in, bringing additional resources and nearly doubling their number. The clan had now seemingly formed a small town out in the middle of the desert. They were close enough to some of the local cities where they could resupply as needed, but far enough away so as not to draw concern or wandering eyes. At the center of the camp, several of their campers and RVs had been positioned together and tarped over, creating a large enclosed structure which had begun to serve almost like a small town hall. More sentries now stood guard around the perimeter to keep watch, though their days were always spent lazily eyeing the empty landscape. As V walked past a row of cars, she reflected on the irony of how the Aldecaldos were thriving just as the opposite was happening to her. She had spent the time walking back to the camp running through different ways to apologize to Judy for her outburst. All of them fell flat as she found the pace of her walking slowing down as she drew near, almost as though her guilt was acting like an anchor. V! V turned to see Pan Am rushing over to her, nearly tripping over a young boy who ran in front of her. Her eyes were wide, and V could see she was out of breath. "Where the hell have you been? Been looking everywhere for you," Pan Am shouted. Suddenly worried, V replied, "Why? What's wrong? Is it Judy?" Pan Am's expression turned to confusion as she tried to catch her breath. "Judy? No. What the hell are you even talking about? I've got a lead on Klein." V stared back blankly, her mind trying to process what Pan Am was talking about.
Klein? Who the hell?
Realizing suddenly that Pan Am was speaking about Dr. Klein, the same Professor Matt had referred to her back in Phoenix as a last-ditch effort who might be able to help, V's eyes widened. "Wait, you found him? You know where he is?" "Might, no. We've been checking all over the net for him since we got his name and hadn't turned up anything. Carol ran another search this morning, and this time it bounced back a hit on a residence sale near Portland for a Klein." V felt a twinge of disappointment. I don't know, Pan. That doesn't sound like much of a lead. Would you let me get the whole damn thing out, please?" Pan Am fired back. Carol dug in and got a hold of his loan application. Lists him as retired now, but his former occupation was as a professor of medicine and cloning science at Portland University. Now think, V, how many professors are there up near fucking Oregon named Klein who specialized in a field relating to DNA? My guess? Not many. Holy shit. V glanced around the camp as she considered the facts, concluding Pan Am was right. "Near Portland, you said?" "Yep, I got the deets. We're gonna pack up and hit the road today, thinking we could get there by tomorrow evening if we allow ourselves a stop to sleep tonight." V considered the plan. "Don't know. Don't you think you ought to stay here? I mean, you got your hands full here, Pan." Pan Am waved away her concern. "Bullshit. Mitch can keep an eye on things for a few days. So what do you say?" "I need to find Judy. I'll track you down in a bit." V turned to head back to their tent before quickly spinning back around. "Thanks, Pan. Really appreciate this." Pan Am smiled. "Go on. I'd like to hit the road sooner rather than later. Track me down when you're ready." V ran back to the tent, her excitement building within her. She had known all along the plan was a long shot and the odds were stacked heavily against her, but now having actually located Klein, it allowed her mind to start to consider possibilities she had closed off to herself previously. DNA reconfiguration. It was the secret behind the technology which had been embedded in the biochip. The science had been around for decades, though used in very specific ways. The treatment of degenerative diseases, fetal enhancements, organ cloning, and so on. Never to try to convert someone's body to accommodate the engram of someone else's consciousness or to reprogram someone's immune system. But still, for the first time in months, V allowed herself the luxury of hope. Peeling back the opening of her tent, V stopped in surprise as she nearly collided with Judy. Reaching up to try to steady her as she awkwardly stumbled back, she was shocked when Judy swiped her hand away. "Fuck off, V. That's what you said, right? Fuck off? Is that what you want me to do?" V stood silent, her mouth open as Judy shouted at her, her voice filled with venom, hatred. "Judy, No, fuck that. I gave up everything to be with you out here, V. Remember? Promised me we'd find a home? What fucking home do we have?"
How could I have done this to her?
I'm sorry, Jude. I'm really fucking sorry. V's voice grew shaky as she spoke. She hadn't realized when she had stormed off earlier just how much she had wounded Judy. "You close yourself off to me, you run off, you lie to me? You fucking promised me you wouldn't lie to me." Judy turned around in frustration and muttered in a low voice, "Walking, talking corpses indeed." The silence which followed was deafening. V felt a mix of shock and hurt as she tried to process what Judy had just said to her. When she had first met Judy in the basement of Lizzie's bar and had learned the details of the crazy heist her and Evelyn had been planning, those words were exactly what she had referred to them both as. Walking, talking corpses. As V reflected upon the memory, she realized Judy was right. Evelyn had lied to Judy, a wound which she had never truly recovered from. Subconsciously, Evelyn had built a wall around herself after the trauma she had endured at the hands of the sick BD editors who had gotten their hands on her later, and ultimately, she had run off in the most permanent way possible when she had cut open her wrists in Judy's bathtub, leaving Judy to clean up the mess and deal with the repercussions and fallout. And now V found herself lying to Judy once more, just as Evelyn had, building a wall around herself like Evelyn. And in the back of her mind, she knew that there was a growing distance between them as their own fears wedged themselves into their minds. In a strange way, she knew she would be running off soon herself, not unlike the way Evelyn had.
Christ, I'm a fucking echo of Evelyn.
Swallowing hard, V lumbered towards the chair in the corner as the weight of Judy's words stabbed through her heart. "Wait." Judy's hand grabbed her by the wrist, causing V to stop and look at her. A single tear had slid its way down her cheek. Gone was the fury and rage which had marked her face just moments earlier. It had now been replaced with sorrow and guilt. "I didn't mean that, V. I'm sorry." "I know," V mumbled. "It's okay, Jude." "No, it's not, V." Judy turned to face V, her arms crossed in front of her. "I get why you're angry. No, it's not me you're angry at. Never should have said that to you. I'm sorry." V drew her in close, wrapping her arms tightly around Judy. "Don't need to be sorry, Jude. You're absolutely right about me. I catch myself wishing this wasn't happening to us. To me. Fuck, there's so much I wanted to still do, to see with you, you know? Find myself going through this in my head all the time. Makes me feel like I'm alone." Judy buried her head deeper into V's neck for a moment before she pulled away. "If things were different, V, if it was me who was the one who was dying and you could swap places to save me, would you do it? Jesus, Judy, of course I fucking would. I'd do anything for you." Judy nodded slowly as another tear fell down her cheek. "Which is exactly what I wish I could do for you, V. Every single minute of every fucking day. but I can't. No matter how much I wish I could save you or take your place, I can't. So, how can you possibly be alone when I'm suffering through this shit just as badly as you are?" V felt her own tears spill from her eyes as she once again pulled Judy close to her and embraced her tightly. She could only imagine the hurt Judy had to be feeling as her own condition had worsened. "Oh, fuck. I'm sorry, Judy," she whispered. "I am too," Judy replied, her voice sounding weak. V guided her hand to the back of Judy's head, running her fingers through her hair before she pulled her face back and planted a gentle kiss upon her forehead. "You know, there still might be a way out of this. Pan, she found him." Judy's eyes widened slightly. "She did? Where?" A small smile pulled on V's lips. "Near Portland. Guy's still kicking, bought himself a nice new house. Just gotta head up there and see what he can do." Her eyes widened further as a glimmer of hope sparked within them. "When do we leave?" V allowed herself a small laugh. "I like the way you think. Pan wants to head out as soon as we're able to." V noticed an odd expression cross Judy's face as she pulled away before moving towards the table and sitting down. "V, I know she wants to help you, and that's great and all, believe me, but what exactly is she going to do out there? I mean, can't we do this ourselves? Doesn't she need to, focus on the camp and all that? Just seems odd. Feels like something we ought to just do ourselves." V stopped herself just as she was about to argue that Pan needed to come with them. Considering it, she realized Judy had made a good point. What benefit exactly would Pan bring out there? They weren't expecting any trouble, and if an elderly professor was going to put up a fight for some reason, V was more than capable of handling it herself. If this was truly just a matter of tracking someone down and having a conversation with them to see if he could help her with a medical matter, there really wasn't any reason for Pan to be tagging along.
"She's gotten too used to looking out for me."
Deciding amongst themselves that it would be best to hit the road without Pan, V and Judy once again rushed to pack up their bags. They shoved everything they could possibly fit inside, the lightweight fabric of the bags straining against everything which was being jammed in. This trip would be longer than their recent visit they had made to Phoenix a couple months earlier. It would take a couple of days for them to get out there, and if Klein could help, then it was an open question just how long they would need to remain out there. As V pushed the last of her belongings down and struggled to seal the zipper of her bag, it dawned on her they might not be returning to the camp anytime soon. Days, weeks, maybe even longer if things went well. As they left their tent, V gestured towards the edge of the camp. "Why don't you go ahead and throw our things in the Thornton? I'm gonna find Pan and have a little chat with her." V wasn't looking forward to disinviting Pan from their trip up north, but Judy was right. This was something they could and should do together. "No need to look for her, V. She's already out there waiting for us," Judy replied. V glanced at the vehicles spaced out near the edge of the camp and spotted Pan throwing a large duffel bag into the back of the same truck they had driven earlier to Phoenix. Sighing to herself, V began to walk over to where Pan was, dreading the conversation to come. "There you two are. Good. Got everything squared away?" Pan asked, her body constantly in motion as she cleared things off of the seats. "Hey, Pan," V said awkwardly as she dropped her bag onto the ground. Her hands awkwardly found their way into her pockets. "Need to talk to you for a minute. Shoot, I want to get as much time on the road today as we can." V glanced over at Judy, who gave her a small grin before she turned to wander off and give them some privacy. "All right, so, not exactly an easy way to say this, so guess I'll just say it. You're sticking back here on this one." Pan turned towards V with a confused look on her face, clearly having been caught off guard. What? V quickly looked over at Judy, who had stopped some distance away and was staring out across the horizon. Opening the back door to the truck, V reached in and pulled out Panam's bag, feeling a twinge of surprise and amusement at how heavy it was compared to their own. Setting it down on the ground, V put her arm around Panam's shoulders and guided her away from the truck. Pan, I'm beyond hugely grateful for everything you've done. Seriously. Could never have found this guy without your help. V, what the hell are you— Pan, V interrupted, knowing if she didn't get across to her quickly, then she was likely to spend the next hour debating with her, which was time lost on the road. This isn't about you, all right? It's about Judy and me. We just need to do this ourselves, to have this time to ourselves. We're gonna be fine out there, Pan. I just need you to hang back on this one, okay? Panam stared back at her with an incredulous look on her face. V, I'm not gonna just sit here while you try to figure all this shit out. You're my best fucking friend. In fact, screw that. You're family, V. A sister. Feeling a warmth take hold in her heart, V turned to face Panam and wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled her into a hug. You're a sister to me too, Pan. And you're my best fucking friend also. And sitting back here on your ass is exactly what you're gonna do. No change in our minds on this one. V felt Panam's arm wrap around her own shoulders, noting a degree of resignation in her movements as she did so. You two gonks are gonna get lost out in the middle of the fucking desert before you even hit road, and I'm gonna end up having to tow your asses all the way back to camp. You know that, right? V laughed. That might actually be kind of fun. We're gonna take the Thornton out there. Be nice and easy to drag back. I'll give you a call when we're ready to get picked up. Panam pulled away and shook her head in frustration, though V was pleased to see there was a small smile on her face. She was taking the rejection better than she had thought she would. All right, you two are on your own. I'll shoot you the deets. Didn't have anything set on where to stay or fuel stops. We'll figure it out as we go, Pan, V interjected. Hey, meant what I said just now. About you being like a sister to me. You know that, right? Panam nodded. Yeah, same goes for you, V. Be careful out there. Will do, V replied, as she turned and started to walk back to where Judy stood. And V, Panam called out, causing V to stop and look back. Good luck. V smiled and waved before turning around once more. As she approached Judy, who had now turned back to face her, she found the idea of just the two of them on the road together for an extended period of time to be an increasingly enticing thought. The last 2 months had gone by so quickly, and while it had been great, V found herself looking forward to having a sense of privacy once again. For more than just the obvious reasons. So, she's okay hanging back? Judy asked. Yeah. Well, guess I should rephrase that. She will hang back. Judy laughed. She's a good person. Glad you two are friends. That we're friends. V's eyes briefly took on a blue glow as Panam sent her all the details on where Klein was. The files Carol had found indicated the residence sale had been completed a few days earlier, and there were already requests in the system to have records updated to reflect the new address. It seemed likely that he had already moved, though V wished they could have gotten a hold of his holo so they could call him first. The prospect of just showing up on his front door and asking for help was an uncomfortable one. All right, you ready? We'll be on desert for a couple hours before we hit the open road, and even then, we're gonna need to stop somewhere to get some rest. I think we can get there before noon tomorrow. Judy nodded. I'll say this for you, V. Never a boring minute. Judy stepped past her. Just as V was about to turn, she jumped as she felt Judy's hand slap against her backside. Shaking her head, V turned to follow and threw their bags in the back of the Thornton. While it was a relatively nimble car, It didn't stand out and had been built to last.
Cozy,
V thought to herself. As V walked to the driver's side, she was nearly knocked over as Judy pushed her way past her. Not a chance. I know you were up early. Don't need you falling asleep and crashing us into the one boulder between here and Oregon. I'm driving. Judy stopped and held her hand out expectantly. V reluctantly took the keys out of her jacket pocket and dropped them into Judy's waiting hand. Fine. You get lost, I'm gonna be the person saying told you so. V walked around to the passenger side as Judy climbed into the driver's seat. Closing the doors, they did a final, quick check to make sure they had everything they would need. Judy started the Thornton's engine, revving it up once before throwing it into drive and hitting the gas. As they pulled away, an idea suddenly crossed V's mind, which brought with it a devilish grin. Hang on, V said as she threw open the sunroof and stood up in her seat. V, what the hell are you doing? Judy shouted. Sticking her head through the sunroof, V turned back to see Pan Am watching them as they drove off. As the wind blasted through her hair, V yelled at the top of her lungs, "To her boobs!" Though she couldn't hear Pan Am over the engine as they sped off, she could see her throw her arms in the air and yell back. V laughed as she crawled back through the sunroof. Long hours passed as they drove through the desert, eventually making their way onto the interstate after a brief moment of panic when they had both thought they had truly gotten lost and would need to call Pan Am to come find them. Throughout the drive, V and Judy made small talk, drifting from one topic to another. By early afternoon, they were both hungry and stopped at a small diner they had passed by. Getting out of the car, they both took a moment to stretch their legs before heading to the entrance. It wasn't much more than a small building with only a few cars parked in the lot, but it would suffice. Walking through the door, V looked around. There was a row of booths along the far wall against the windows and a small coffee bar on the opposite side. There were a pair of patrons sitting at the bar drinking coffee while the server was talking with a cook on the other side. Seeing them walk in, the server, an old man who had to be pushing 80 at least, called out to them, "Have a seat wherever. Be with you in a second." Sitting down at one of the booths, V and Judy glanced at the menus. The options were few, but what they did have sounded delicious after the long day they had spent on the road. The server slowly walked towards them, and V noticed he appeared to have a bad limp and was favoring his right leg. "What can I get you?" he asked. V and Judy placed their orders and made sure to ask for a full pot of coffee. They were going to need the extra kick to make it through the afternoon and evening. The old man silently nodded his head, not bothering to write down the order before he turned and walked back to the bar. Hearing him repeat their order in perfect detail to the cook while seeing him start to brew a fresh pot of synthetic coffee, V turned her attention back to Judy. "I'm starving. You?" Judy replied. Her attention was still on the old man who was now leaning against the bar while the cook prepared the food. V's eyes moved between Judy and the old man, trying to understand what she was thinking. It didn't take long for her curiosity to get the better of her as she waved her hand in front of Judy's face, causing her to blink and look at V. "Hey, welcome back. What was that all about?" Judy glanced back at the old man for a moment before looking back at V. "Nothing really. Just kind of reminds me of my abuelo a little. Even has a limp like he does, though certainly not that." Judy stopped, looking down at the empty table in front of her before she continued. "I guess certainly not as bad as the last time I saw him. Christ, must have been nearly 4 years since the last time I saw him." V gave her an understanding smile as she reached out and squeezed Judy's hand. "I'm sure they understand why, Jude, and I'll bet they're glad you visit when you can." Judy returned her smile and pulled her hand back as the old man returned with the pot of coffee. "Should just be another minute or two for your order." As the server limped away, a memory suddenly popped into V's mind. She remembered diving through the remains of Laguna Bend with Judy, their first date. She had slowly floated her way through the remains of the submerged ghost town, while Judy had told her about the place she had grown up in. It had been an incredible experience, which had led to the beginning of their relationship. V felt perplexed at why the memory of it had emerged in her thoughts. Then it dawned upon her. Wait, they live up around here, don't they? I remember you telling me they were in Oregon, right? Judy nodded. Actually, they're only a couple hours outside of Portland, a small town called Warm Springs. Well, there you go. We could swing by there tomorrow on the way. Judy smiled, but was shaking her head. Appreciate the thought, V, but we really ought to get you to Portland stat. Always time for me to make a family visit afterwards. As the server returned with 2 plates covered with pancakes and berries, V thought about what Judy had said. Family. She had gotten so caught up in the excitement of getting Judy to her grandparents, she hadn't realized they still had no idea who she was, or what kind of people they even were. Judy must have noticed V was now the one lost in her thoughts as she dipped her head slightly so V could see her gaze. My turn now. You okay, V? V nodded. Yeah, sorry. Guess I just forgot they're your family, not friends. I guess it would be pretty awkward having me tag along. Didn't mean to overreach or anything. Judy's eyes widened. Oh no, V, that's not it at all. They'd love to meet you. Or at least I think they would. Never actually brought someone home to them before. Taking a sip from her coffee, she grinned. Should be an interesting experience. You sure? I'll make sure I leave my iron in the car, V quipped. Yeah, definitely do that. V glanced out the window before turning back to Judy. I'm kinda looking forward to it now, actually. Sure you don't want to swing by there first? V, we'll get there, alright? We're not gonna avoid this. Gotta prioritize. I know. Just going back to what you said about having time. Won't always be the case. V saw the corners of Judy's lips slide downward into a small frown as she dug her fork into her food. They ate in silence, occasionally sipping from their coffee, which was considerably better than what they had been used to back at the camp. As V cleaned off the last scraps on her plate, she glanced up and saw Judy staring absently out the window. You're gonna have to tell me about where you're always going off to when you zone out like that. Must be a hell of a place, V joked, though Judy's expression remained unchanged even as she looked back at her. Judy shifted uncomfortably. Don't want to be a downer, but wanted to ask you something. V put her fork down as she felt her anxiety rising. Okay. Let's have it. You said you woke up with your heart pounding this morning. Were you, scared? Judy's eyes were filled with concern, and V couldn't help but feel a pang in her heart. V thought back to that moment and the argument which had followed. She had wanted to push the entire episode away, not just to shield Judy from what was happening, but to shield herself from it as well. But now there didn't seem to be much purpose in trying to do so. They both knew they were taking their last shot, and if things didn't go well, soon there would be nowhere left for them to run or hide. V sighed. Yeah, kind of. I mean, had a lot of recent experience, which I guess kind of prepared me for it. Pills helped, though. Judy nodded silently, the same worry still in her eyes. Keep having to remind myself you've been dealing with this shit for a while now. You ever think about what happens after? Seeing confusion in V's eyes, she continued. I mean, you think there's anything like after this life? V shrugged. Not really. Think we're just here for however long we've got, and then we're gone. Never bothered me much, to be honest. Always thought of it like just settling down for a long nap. Better than the alternative. If there's any kind of afterlife, I don't think I want to find myself getting judged after all the shit I've done. As V spoke, She could see Judy's eyes searching her own for something, though V wasn't sure what. "What's going on, Jude?" Now it was Judy's turn to sigh as she glanced away. For a moment, V thought she wasn't going to answer before she finally broke her silence. "Told you about the church I used to hang around at when I was a kid. Mi abuelas were big believers, tried to get me to be the same way. Never really took, though. Guess I've always felt like I let them down a little. Can't blame yourself for that, Judy. Can't force someone to believe in something if they don't want to." "I know," Judy replied. "It's just, I kind of wish I would have listened to them more. Remember them always telling me how faith could help." V nodded, contemplating what Judy was saying. She knew Judy was struggling with the situation, but hadn't known that she had been considering turning to religion as an option. V knew it certainly wasn't something for her, as she had never seen the point in wishing for things that never came to be. But for Judy, it was a part of her family and who she was, even if it had never truly taken root. "I don't think it's a bad thing to have faith, Judy. So, do you want to? Or, I guess, do you feel, I don't know, incomplete?" "Not incomplete, V. Never with you. Just something... I can't think of the right word. Judy, I think we ought to see him. You should tell him all this, see what they say. No matter what, I love you the way you are, and any way you'll be." Judy paused to consider her words. "Tell you what, let's get your head fixed up first, and then we'll stop there. Guess I'm actually a little nervous about seeing him again. Feels like it's been so long. Not sure I'm the same person I was when they last saw me." V reached her hand under the table and gave Judy's knee a gentle squeeze. "Maybe not. Don't think that's a bad thing, though, Jude. Hell, I'll sing your praises for you. Could tell him about all those great orgasms you were cranking up at Lizzie's." Judy smiled as she picked up a small piece of fruit off her plate and threw it at V. "Gonk?" V laughed as she dodged the piece of incoming food, narrowly avoiding her. "Seriously, though, let's get out there. I'd like to meet them, see if I can piece together where this Judy came from, where she might be going." Judy nodded. "Okay. And V, love you too." V smiled as she dug her fork into her breakfast, feeling content. When they were finished, V paid the tab, drawing a gasp of surprise from Judy at the amount of the tip she left. "Jesus, V? Trying to push him to retirement?" V laughed as they headed towards the car. "Hey, they're only Eddie's, Jude. Think he needs them more than we do." They hit the road once more and drove through the afternoon and into the evening hours. V had taken the wheel this time, insisting on giving Judy a break even as she found herself wishing for a bed to lie down in. Deciding not to stop anywhere else so they could cut down on driving the following day, their dinner consisted of some of the bagged snacks they had brought with them. By the time they had reached the border between Nevada and Oregon, the sun had sunk below the horizon and a storm had crossed their paths, causing a torrent of rain to pound against the windshield. V decided it was time to call it a day and began searching for a place to stop for the night. Seeing a sign for a destination called Paradise Valley, V pulled off the interstate and drove down the small road for a few miles before reaching the small town. There were a few houses and businesses scattered between the hills, though the area was sparse and littered with tall pine trees. Even in the dark and through the curtain of falling rain, it was a striking sight for V after having spent a lifetime staring at the steel and concrete jungle of Night City. Spotting a sign attached to a small building which said vacancy, V pulled into the small lot and stopped the car. The motel couldn't have had more than 7 or 8 rooms, and there was only one other car in the lot. Shutting off the engine, they sat motionless for a moment as they listened to the steady roar of rain striking the car. They glanced at one another before V made the first move. "It's all you, Jude." Judy's eyes widened. "Fuck that, V. You're the one with all the eddies, as you always like to remind me. They're not gonna rent a room out to my broke ass." "Sure they would. Just tell them we'll cover it in the morning." "V, this ain't the no-tell motel. They're gonna want to get paid up front. Stop stalling and get out there." V looked out the window towards the motel. There was a single light on near the front door, which V assumed was the front desk. Casting a final, dirty glance towards Judy, V grabbed her jacket out of the back of the car and threw it on. "Fine. Soon as I'm out, though, I'm making a run to the door. You're grabbing the bags." V readied herself and quickly flung the door open. She immediately felt the rain start to drench her as she quickly climbed out and slammed the door shut behind her before bolting for the entrance. Bursting inside, V quickly closed the door behind her and wiped the rain from her face. A middle-aged man was sitting in a recliner behind a small table that was propped up in the middle of the room, a TV sitting on top of it. Next to him was an empty plate that still had some scraps of food on it and an empty glass. Judging from his expression, he had obviously not been expecting any company. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. Fucking pouring out there. We'd like a room." The man rose from the recliner, eyeing her carefully as he approached the table. "Of course. Don't mind my asking. Who's we?" V could feel heat starting to build upon her face. She wasn't in the mood to play 20 questions with this guy, though she could understand the reservation. The entire town was out in the middle of nowhere, and it was likely a rare event that the place would even be half full. "Just me and one other. She's still in the car. Didn't want to get soaked out there," V said, making sure not to provide any more detail than was necessary. The man's shoulders seemed to relax as he punched some information into the small monitor that rested on the table. V noted he didn't appear to have any implants or chrome on him, a rarity in this day and age. Or perhaps more of a commonality away from the urban sprawls V had spent nearly her entire life in. "Alright, I got you down for room 1. It's the first one right down the sidewalk." The man opened a drawer and took out a small key, handing it to her. "Checkout's at 8, and I usually run some coffee in here if you're still around before you leave. There's a small diner across the street that serves a good breakfast." V smiled. Clearly the man was used to outsiders and knew what questions most of his visitors would ask before they did. "Thanks, appreciate it." Turning around, V braced herself once more as she swung the door open and ran out again into the rain, making sure to close the door behind her as gently as possible so as not to upset the owner again. With the key still in her hand, V raced down the sidewalk towards the first door just as the man instructed, her boots splashing through the puddles of water on the ground. Though she didn't turn to look, she could hear Judy opening the car door and scrambling to get the bags out of the back. Reaching the first door, V dropped the key on the ground. Quickly picking it up, she struggled to get it into the small lock on the doorknob. The rain had now thoroughly drenched her clothes and was running down every crevice of her body. "Hurry the fuck up, V!" Judy yelled out. V could hear her footsteps racing behind her as she finally got the key into the lock and turned it, opening the door. They both ran inside and quickly shut the door behind them. The room itself was dark, with only the dim glow from the vacancy sign outside providing any source of light. She could make out a bed in front of her and a small chair next to it. There was a narrow path between the bed and the wall, which, V assumed, led to the bathroom. Judy dropped the bags onto the floor. "Couldn't have moved any slower, could you? Hey, was just waiting for you to haul your ass out of the car. Not my fault you're drenched." V looked at Judy and felt a sudden surge of arousal course through her as she took in the sight before her. Judy was completely soaked from head to foot. Rain was dripping off of her and puddling on the floor beneath. Her clothes stuck to her skin, revealing every curve of her body and exposing the ink of her tattoos beneath. Her hair clung to the side of her head, and the eyeliner she usually wore had streaked down her cheeks. Most alluring of all, however, was the look in her own eyes. Hunger.
Holy shit.
Long seconds passed as they stared one another down in silence before Judy suddenly lunged towards her, smashing her lips against her own. V slid her tongue into Judy's mouth as she felt Judy's hand running across her body and ripping off her jacket. With a quick and firm grasp, she took hold of a tuft of Judy's hair and pulled her head back, provoking a moan from her as V moved her mouth to Judy's neck. As she ran her tongue along the length of her neck, V was suddenly shoved backwards onto the bed. Judy stared down at her, panting heavily as she ripped her top off, exposing her glistening breasts. V did the same, her heart pounding in her chest as her eyes roamed across Judy's slick body. Stripping off her pants, Judy paused with pure intensity in her eyes as V removed the last of her garments. V wanted her badly, so badly she knew she was already wet. Slowly, Judy approached the bed, her eyes locked on V's. The dim, red glow sharply contrasted her features as she loomed over her, and V couldn't help but feel a mix of intimidation and excitement. Though she knew she was certainly stronger and a far better fighter when it came down to it, Judy had a certain feistiness and stubbornness to her. Combined with the way her skin glowed and the fierce look in her eyes, V wanted her to take her. With a quick and graceful movement, Judy climbed on top of V and brought her lips onto her neck. V could feel Judy's teeth grazing her neckline as she slowly lowered her mouth further past her shoulders. V's hands roamed across Judy's back, one reaching lower to grasp onto her ass while the other went higher, pulling Judy's mouth closer. When her tongue grazed across V's nipple, she gasped and arched her back to give Judy more access. V wrapped her leg around Judy's as she enjoyed the sensation of her tongue flicking across her nub. Suddenly, she felt a sharp twinge of pain as Judy bit down, not hard enough to draw blood, but just enough to get V's attention. With both hands, V shoved Judy back before twisting out from under her. Before Judy could roll onto her back to allow V to get on top of her, though, V gripped onto her waist and pushed her crashing down onto the bed, exposing her ass. Quickly rolling on top of her, V allowed her left hand to cup Judy's cheek, caressing the soft flesh and grazing her fingers over Judy's open lips. Her other hand drifted lower, down the slope of Judy's back to where her hips joined, before reaching further between her legs to feel Judy's wetness. Judy gasped as V entered her from behind, her fingers sliding through her folds. "Oh, fuck me, V," Judy breathed. Bringing her mouth down to Judy's ear, she began to quicken her pace as her tongue rolled across the sensitive flesh of her earlobe. As she worked her fingers in and out, Judy began to push back, meeting V's thrusts. Sensing that she was getting closer, she whispered in her ear, "Is this what you want?" "Yes, please, V. Oh, fuck," Judy whispered back. V pulled her fingers away, causing Judy to let out a small moan of frustration as she glanced back at her. With a sly grin, V began to slide her way further down Judy's body until her mouth reached the same place her fingers had been moments earlier. As she darted her tongue in and out of Judy, she reached a hand under her and danced her fingers across her clit, taking pleasure in the sounds Judy made as she did so. Just as Judy began to quiver and cry out, V brought her free hand down hard against Judy's ass, driving her tongue as far in as she could while she vigorously worked her with her other hand. She was grateful the room next door was empty. As Judy came down from her orgasm, V brought her mouth back to Judy's ear. But before she could say anything, Judy suddenly surged up and sent V reeling onto the opposite end of the bed. Before she knew it, Judy was on top of her once again. The same desire V had seen earlier was staring back at her now. Judy was still panting, and a small smile spread on her face. "You are so gonna get it." V reached up and rested a finger across Judy's lips, preventing her from saying anything further. Judy's eyes searched across V's body before returning to meet her gaze. Opening her lips slightly, she allowed V's finger into her mouth, swirling her tongue around it as she gently sucked. V moaned as she felt Judy's hand take hold of her breasts, her fingers grazing across her nipples. V pulled her finger away from Judy's mouth, resting her hands on her thighs as Judy lowered herself and kissed her. Judy quickly moved her hands away from V's breasts and grabbed hold of her wrists before wrenching them above her head, eliciting a gasp of surprise from V. Pulling away while she held V pinned down, Judy looked at her once more before releasing her hold and sliding her body down. Wrapping her hands around V's thighs, she quickly brought her head down and slowly lapped her tongue across V's entrance. Fuck, V cried out as Judy began to tease her, moving her tongue delicately across her folds before finding her clit. As V shuddered, she felt Judy's hands tighten their grip as she began to quicken her motions. As she felt herself approaching her orgasm, Judy moved a hand to cup V's breast. With the other, she brought her fingers towards V's entrance and pushed into her, slowly working back and forth. The sudden sensation of Judy's thumb gently flirting with her small entrance below her sex sent her over the edge. V screamed loudly, twisting her body wildly as she gripped hold of Judy's hair and pulled her closer. When she was finally spent, V went limp, her muscles still quivering. Judy positioned herself so they were face to face, both of them still catching their breath. V managed a small chuckle. What the fuck was that? Judy smiled and bit her lip. Was gonna ask you the same. Should have scrolled that one for later. Happy to oblige, V replied, drawing a small laugh from Judy. After a few moments, they each went to the bathroom to relieve themselves, making sure to drape their wet clothes they had strewn about the room earlier across the basin of the tub so they would dry out overnight. Returning to bed, Judy grabbed hold of the blanket on the bed and pulled it over them. As they had so many nights before, they turned to face one another. It was in these moments that so much was spoken between them, and as V searched into the pair of brown eyes which stared back at her, she could feel all the things Judy was feeling in that moment. She wished there was something she could say through her words which would encapsulate everything she was feeling in that moment, but instead could only manage a whisper. I love you. Running her fingers through V's hair, Judy replied, Love you too, V. V could see many emotions looking back at her through Judy's gentle eyes. Love, sadness, hope, vulnerability, and of course, the ever-present fear which had pervaded through so much of their time together. The uncertainty of the last few months would culminate in the next day, and the constant emotional turmoil had taken its toll. Her own anxieties had been building within her, and she was aware of how they were beginning to spill out into the open. V tried to think of the right words she could speak to try to diffuse Judy's fear and to comfort her. But during the time she had spent with Judy, she had learned she could often say more by not speaking. It was an intimacy she had not shared with anyone else before. As the rain continued to pour outside, V cupped Judy's cheek and whispered a single word before they fell asleep. Tomorrow.